Constitution of the United States. We cannot reestablish constitutional government and restore our free republic until a decisive number of Americans understand the Constitution and use it as a guide to political action. A constitution is meaningless unless it is construed to mean exactly what it says, and unless agents of government are compelled to obey all its provisions. You cannot depend on politicians to tell you whether they violate the Constitution. They all say they respect and obey it. You cannot depend on any agent of government to tell you what your Constitution means. You must read it yourself to find out. When you find out, you should do your utmost to remove from public office every official who violates the Constitution's clear meaning, if you want to save your own freedom and help restore your republic. I have published the full text of the Constitution. All who order copies of this broadcast will receive it. That is a summary of my report on Constitution of the United States. The full report after a message from my sponsor. The Constitution delegates the major powers of the federal government to Congress. The Constitution provides for a Supreme Court, specifying and limiting its original jurisdiction, giving Congress absolute authority to control, limit, or abolish the court's appellate jurisdiction. Federal courts are given no authority over any state laws. The first article of the Constitution begins, "All legislative powers herein granted." This means that the federal government cannot legally exercise any power not clearly granted in the Constitution. The 52-word preamble includes promotion of the general welfare among the broad purposes for which the Constitution was ordained, but the preamble is not a grant of power. The only other place where promotion of the general welfare is mentioned in our Constitution is Section 8 of Article 1. The Congress shall have power to lay and collect taxes, duties, imports, and excises, to pay the debts and provide for the common defense and general welfare of the United States. Many assert that this general welfare clause gives government broad powers to do anything which the President and Congress claim to be necessary for common defense and general welfare. That is not true. James Madison, father of the Constitution, said the Constitution grants no general powers to the federal government. He explained that the so-called welfare clause is not a grant of power. It is merely a heading for enumerated powers which Congress may exercise to provide for the common defense and general welfare. James Madison delivered a speech on this subject to the first United States Congress. Quote, "If Congress can apply money indefinitely to the general welfare and are the sole and supreme judges of the general welfare, they may take the care of religion into their own hands. They may establish teachers in every state, county, and parish, and may pay them out of the public treasury. They may take into their own hands the education of children, establishing in like manner schools throughout the Union. They may undertake the regulation of all roads other than post roads. In short, everything from the highest object of state legislation down to the most minute object of policy would be thrown under the power of Congress. For every object I have mentioned would admit the application of money and might be called, if Congress pleased, provisions for the general welfare." End quote. Madison also said, "The powers delegated to the federal government are few and defined. Those which are to remain in the state governments are numerous and indefinite. The powers reserved to the states will extend to all the objects which in the ordinary course of affairs concern the lives, liberties, and properties of the people, the internal order, improvement, and prosperity of the state." In short, the Constitution created a system in which the federal government is limited to enumerated powers, states remaining sovereign republics with regard to their internal affairs. In such a system, state governments, which can be controlled by local citizens, have elastic, unspecified power to experiment with social reform legislation which may seem to be required. Legislation, for example, dealing with unemployment, medical care for the destitute, and other such general welfare programs. If a state government abuses its broad powers, it will lose productive citizens to other states. The experience of other states and competition among states will force correction of major errors. If the federal government is given broad general powers to experiment with social reform legislation and to intervene in private and state affairs, the stupidities of the general bureaucracy can be imposed on the whole population uniformly, leaving no place for oppressed citizens to seek refuge, no competition to force correction or even admission of error, no competitive example anywhere to prove that freedom works better than bureaucratic planning. If federal officials assume power to experiment with programs not authorized by the Constitution, they break the contract of government, the Constitution. When, for any cause however popular, for any need however great, for any emergency however dire, federal officials violate the binding contract of the Constitution, nothing is left to fend off tyranny. When the federal government commits one act not authorized by the Constitution, it cracks the dam erected to control governmental power. The crack may at first be imperceptible, but eventually it will widen until the dam is gone, and a destructive flood of uncontrollable governmental power will engulf all. Thomas Jefferson, author of the Declaration of Independence, expressed the unique American concept of a constitutionally limited federal government when he said, "In questions of political power, speak to me not of confidence in men, but just bind them down from mischief with the chains of a constitution." Does this mean that an 18th century constitution prevents the nation from ever acting through the federal government to do something which a majority wants done? No. The people, by due process, can amend the Constitution, granting power which they want government to have. By no other means can the Constitution be legally changed, or limitations of the power of government legally altered. A Supreme Court decision is not constitutionally valid if it reads into the Constitution or its amendments some meaning not there when the Constitution and its amendments were adopted. Presidential decrees and acts of Congress are constitutionally invalid no matter what the Supreme Court says, and no matter how many previous decrees and acts may be cited as precedents, if said decrees and acts are not patently, constitutionally authorized. Obeying the Constitution does not mean obedience by the people. It means obedience by the federal government. The Constitution is a binding contract adopted by the people, meaning exactly what it says, to be obeyed meticulously by all agents and agencies of government, to be changed only by explicit constitutional process. Legislative, executive, and judicial usurpation of power has violated the Constitution so long and so outrageously that this nation is sinking day by day into a morass of lawless tyranny. We cannot reestablish constitutional government and restore our free republic until a decisive number of Americans understand our organic documents of government and use them as guides to political action. The organic documents are the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution as amended. In the report on which this broadcast is based, and in the report for the broadcast next week, I publish full text of our organic documents of government. The Declaration of Independence is too short to fill one whole report. The Constitution and its 24 amendments are too long for one report. So in the report on which this particular broadcast is based, I publish the full text of the Constitution of the United States as written by the Founding Fathers at the Constitutional Convention in Philadelphia, 1787, and as adopted by the original 13 states in the American Union. The actual text is prefaced with brief commentary on the meaning of the Constitution, the commentary taken largely from the Founding Fathers themselves. My broadcast next week will give full text of the Declaration of Independence and of all constitutional amendments with commentary. My hope is that a significant number of Americans will get, read, pass on to others, and discuss these documents, which are the foundation stones of our greatness as a nation, the only bulwarks to protect our liberties as civilized human beings. Unless a significant number of Americans do study these organic documents of government and use them as guides to political action, our republic is doomed. A constitution is meaningless unless it is construed to mean exactly what it says, and unless the agents of government sworn to uphold the Constitution are compelled to obey all its provisions explicitly. You should not vote for any politician who consistently, by his voting in Congress and by his support of federal programs and policies, violates the Constitution. You cannot depend on the politicians to tell you whether they violate the Constitution. They all tell you they respect and obey it. You cannot depend on any agents of government in the judicial, executive, or legislative branches to tell you what your Constitution means. You must read it yourself to find out. When you find out, you should do your utmost to remove from public office every official who violates the Constitution's clear meaning, if you want to save your own freedom and help restore your republic. All who order copies of this broadcast will receive the full text of the Constitution of the United States with commentary from the Founding Fathers. I am Dan Smoot. Goodbye. God bless you.